Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Monday to you. Welcome to today's virtual office hour, which is focused on onboarding and mentoring youth apprentices. My name is Cassandra McGee, and I'm a senior program manager with JFF, and we are glad you chose to join us for today's discussion, which will be led by Julie Hagel, the Director of New Hampshire Operations for Institute for American Apprenticeships. As a reminder, this session will be recorded, so if you're not the primary speaker, please ensure your phone is muted for best call quality. However, we do want your input and for you to participate in today's discussion. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to throw those in the chat box, or there will be a time for question and answer at the end of today's presentation. This session is part of our youth apprenticeship program in contract with the U.S. Department of Labor, the Youth Apprenticeship and Intermediaries Project. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Andrea Messing-Matthey, who is a director at JFF. Andrea?
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. As Cassandra mentioned, this is our Youth Apprenticeship Works Community of Practice series, where we try to sit together with a small group of practitioners and just talk about some of the issues and ideas that are coming up in the work that we're doing, building a movement around youth apprenticeship, particularly registered youth apprenticeship. So if there are any questions, please do feel free to come off of mute or post them in the chat box, and we look forward to extending the conversation. Julie, I'll go ahead and pass it on to you.
Thank you, Andrea. I appreciate it. And happy Monday afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you talking about this. I love working with young people, and I think that sometimes we don't appreciate how they will show up, and they will make good employees. They will make great apprentices. So what I wanted to do is I have a few talking points to get us started, but I'm perfectly fine with just come in with any questions that you might have. I do like to prepare some talking points. So if you want to just listen and just kind of absorb, that's fine. Either way, I'm good either way. So I've been working in the apprenticeship world for quite some time. Institute for American Apprenticeships started 21 years ago, kind of with the notion. Sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. Sorry about that. So we started with the notion that if someone has the ability and the interest and is willing to put in the hard work, that they can demonstrate to an employer that although they don't come with the skills pre-built, that they are ready and willing and able to learn and make great employees. And so that's really kind of at the foundation of apprenticeship. If you think about it, it's someone who has the ability, has the willingness, but isn't quite ready yet to be a full-fledged employee. So Cassandra, if we could have the next slide, please. So this is what I wanted to talk about. And this picture of the young lady is actually one of our former youth apprentices. She went through a high school program, and then between her junior and senior year, and then after she graduated from high school, went into to complete her apprenticeship program in an advanced manufacturing apprenticeship. So you can't see her face, but I'm sure there's a great big smile under that mask that she's wearing. So I wanted to talk about kind of our top 6 things that we really look at. A lot of these are going to be important as well for any apprentice onboarding, but we're going to touch on these things and then talk about some more specifics around the youth apprenticeship. So we're going to talk about preparation, expectations, communication, feedback, inclusion, and respect. Next slide, please. So in terms of preparation, I like to encourage people to really think about that who, what, when, where, how. The why, I think we know that, but let's talk about that who, what, when, where, and how. So important things to really be ready. So think about when your apprentice comes in, if you are not ready, that's going to set a tone, and it's a tone that is so important to show the apprentice that they are important enough for you to get ready for them. So know who that mentor is going to be. know what the work-based learning plan is going to look like. Not just in terms of that high level, but, really put some detail in it. Hours of work, this seems might seem intuitive, but it's very important, especially with youth, to spell things out very clearly. So if you say, come in first thing in the morning, 10 o'clock might be their first thing in the morning. So you have to be specific and say 8 a.m. is when we start. And where, so make sure that there's a workspace. So it's important that the youth apprentice or any apprentice knows this is my space and they're not borrowing space from somewhere else. It just helps to set the stage that they're important and you want them to be there. And then the how. So, think about how is this work going to be done? So that, the more specifics that you can get into in your preparation, the smoother that onboarding and transition is going to be. Next slide, please. Setting expectations is so important for anyone, but it's particularly important for young people who don't have a lot of work experience. What you want to do is make sure that you're explaining the what, the how, and the why. So if I said to an apprentice, I want you to do X, and they don't understand exactly how they're going to do X or why they're going to do X, it can start to cause a little bit of a disconnect. So an example is if I said to an apprentice, we expect our staff to be on time. So what does on time mean? It means to be at your desk, ready to work at the appointed time. And we do this because it helps everyone on the team to get off to a good start for the day. And I'll give you, this was an example that it was a good lesson for me, but it was something that I just had not even thought about. We had some young apprentices in a healthcare setting. They were working in a clinic, and so they clock in and they clock out. They're paid hourly. So I learned that these apprentices were clocking in and then going to get their coffee. So we had to have a discussion about, yeah, coffee is fine, it's perfectly fine, but do that before you clock in. That's kind of a personal. And I like this picture of the hamburger also because if I said, oh, I'm hungry for a hamburger, my hamburger might have one patty, but someone else's hamburger might have 4 or 5 or whatever we see on this. So, again, it's just a reminder to be very specific with what the expectations are. Next slide. So communication, this is one to really think about and almost practice. So even though a youth apprentice does not have the same level of experience perhaps as you might have in the working world, and some of us have children, have young adult children, we might be used to talking with them in a certain way. But one thing that's important to think about is the communication should be adult to adult. You might have more work experience, you might have more wrinkles, whatever, but it should be adult to adult. One of the ways that you can do this is to really connect the work that the apprentice is going to be doing with the success of the organization. I've worked a lot in the healthcare environment, so a lot of my examples will probably be healthcare, but it really goes across the board. So, for example, we ran a pharmacy technician apprenticeship program for about 7 years for Dartmouth Hitchcock in Hanover, New Hampshire. One of the things that was important in the work there was to connect for those the apprentices and the youth apprentices that this wasn't just a we're going to put pills in the bottle. This is saving people's lives. It's curing people. And then connecting that with being a successful healthcare organization. So we would have those discussions about what does the job of the pharmacy technician really mean to the larger organization, and it just helps it helps them, you know, to understand that what they're doing is important, and it's not just a homework assignment. Another aspect around communication is to make sure that the explanations are brief and succinct, but clear. So the more you go on and on to try to explain something, the more likely it is that the youth apprentice it may tune out at some point and miss some of the point. And I like this little image here. So the communication in our little picture here is looks like it's a one-way teacher to the school of fish, but it really should be a two-way street. So make sure that you invite the apprentice to participate, to ask questions, to give opinions. Very, very important. Any questions so far? Not yet? All right, next slide. So feedback. This is one of my favorite areas of apprenticeship, to be honest with you, because feedback is purposeful and it's built in. So we intend to have feedback. So some of the points that we've learned over the time that we've been working with youth apprentices is how important it is to give regular feedback. So even if you could do a 1-minute feedback each day, that is important. Youth apprentices in particular really crave that feedback. So even if it's just you know what, today was great, we got this done, I liked that you did that, tomorrow we're going to do such and such. Providing positive feedback or positive reinforcement is very important. I remember reading a book on child rearing, and this stood out to me, and I think it's important for everyone, but in particular for the youth apprentices, is to catch them doing something good. So catch them doing something well, not just trying to catch them when they need some correction. But if correction is needed, I always start with a positive statement. So I really stop and think about how I'm going to deliver a message before I deliver the message. So instead of just saying, okay, you need to do this in this way, or giving some corrective, start off with that positive. I really liked the way you did this. I'd also like to see you take some of that initiative in this area and apply it to this other area as well. So I always try to start with something positive. It just helps, and of course this really applies for anyone, I think. But in particular with the youth apprentices. We do have a question that came up on the chat. How have you found that this helps with apprentice performance and/or retention? That's a really great question. One of the reasons, so we do, when an apprentice leaves an apprenticeship early, in particular, or leaves employment after, we try to follow the apprentices even after they've completed their apprenticeships. And we do want to know if they've left, what is it that's going on? And we've had pretty good success because we maintain relationships with our apprentices throughout their on-the-job learning portion. It helps with apprentice performance and retention because it helps them to feel good about what they're doing, and it helps them to feel good about themselves. One of the reasons that some of our former apprentices give for being dissatisfied in an apprenticeship is that they feel that someone is always coming down on them or always correcting them. So it's very, very important to balance that. One other piece that's pretty important is learning how to tell the difference between willful behavior and immaturity. So we might forget at times that this person does not have the level of experience that we've life experiences, work experiences, and they're still growing. And so some behavior may just be immaturity and some may be willful. If I go back to the coffee example, that was definitely not willful behavior by any means. It was, it was really an immaturity and not understanding the expectations. Um, and and it's also really important to think about how am I going to handle one or the other. Really pre-plan how you're going to handle not every single situation, but general situations. For example, how am I going to handle if I feel that there's some willful behavior that is not positive and affects the workplace? How am I going to handle that? Or how am I going to handle if someone is perhaps acting out of a lack of maturity? Next slide, please, Cassandra. So this kind of, these two really go hand in hand, these two topics, inclusion, but I pointed out separately because there's a lot that you can do. Inclusion is another area that will help with apprentice performance and retention. If the apprentice feels included and feels important in the bigger process, they're more likely to stay. And as a side, our apprentice retention at IAA has been around 90%. So about 90% of our apprentices, including the youth apprentices who start their apprenticeship, do finish it. And I can attribute this to a lot of, internally, we discuss these topics. And as things are coming up, we will reach out to one of our colleagues in the office and say, hey, this happened. Here's how I think I'm going to handle it. How would you handle it? Or what do you think? So we're very purposeful on the feedback and encouraging the employers to be inclusive and what specifically can you do to help to be inclusive. So it starts with remembering that this is an opportunity for you to help your new apprentice to develop strong professional habits and behaviors. So they're learning, they like to learn, especially if they can connect all those dots of why I'm learning it. And really beyond just, I'm doing this because I'm getting a paycheck. They really do want to contribute. And sometimes we forget that. Invite the apprentice to attend meetings and participate in discussions. So anytime that a meeting is appropriate for an apprentice to attend, whether they understand what's going on or not, we encourage employers to invite them to attend. We may coach the apprentice to, sit and listen and see what you can learn. And then after the meeting, let's debrief and talk about your questions. But it really helps them to make those connections and to feel important. I know when I was a young person in the workplace, I was invited to attend meetings that, quite honestly, I was nervous because I felt it was over my head, but it was such a growth experience to be exposed to things that were, kind of above my pay grade. I see a question coming in. Have you ever had to manage a situation where you were instructing an apprentice one way, but the actual staff were doing things differently? In other words, holding the apprentice to a higher standard than existing staff? That is a great question. And the answer is yes, we definitely have. So we do a lot of coaching outside of the workplace. So our apprentices do journaling, for example. So they, we expect them to journal. We use Canvas as a platform. And this is a really great way for us as the intermediaries to stay in touch and to see what some of those patterns are. And it's it's a safe place for the apprentice to to reach out and open a topic up. And this definitely does happen. We are very cautious with the apprentices. We don't ever want them to feel like they're in a place where they're being a tattletale, or we go back to the employer and say, hey, employer, apprentice Jane said this, why are you doing that? So we try to, collect information, and then I would go back to the employer, and if I can actually talk with the particular staff member, I would do that. If not, I would talk with maybe a supervisor or manager, or the human resources or whoever our contact person is, and I would just ask some questions. So when we're talking about, I'll give an example of one time when this actually happened. So I'm going to give you a pharmacy technician example. So I am very big on patient safety, as everyone working in healthcare should be. And I train the apprentices that you always overdo it on the sterility, for example. You always wear gloves, for example. And I did have a technician apprentice whose preceptor said, no, you don't need to wear gloves when you're drawing up the syringes or doing this or that. And so that gave me an opportunity to go back and say, I'd like to know more about how the preceptors are working with the technicians when they're pre-filling syringes or when they're counting pills or whatever. And then that gives me the information to understand where the disconnect might be. And then I can talk about it, and it leaves the apprentice totally out of it. Yeah, and then I see another question here about the coffee example. Yes, so we did have people in the workplace in that very same example who said, we're not really ready to go. It's not a big deal, so it's okay. So in that case, I would go back to the human resources or the workplace development staff to really clarify that, because it can be confusing for anyone, but particularly for young people if they're having kind of two sets of standards. And this does lead right into the next topic about respect. We always recommend setting goals with the apprentice and ensuring that there's going to be some sort of positive consequence for meeting that goal. So you might start off with having kind of a basic set of goals, but and if in the workplace they're sort of preset or predetermined goals, I would still always have at least one goal for the apprentice themselves. So it might be a goal like, I'm going to give a 5-minute I'm going to learn something and give a 5-minute presentation on what I've learned to this group of people. So that does not disturb the workflow. And it's a good goal. It's a good growth goal for the apprentice, and then have, some sort of positive consequence. So it's important to remember that this is the beginning of the career journey for that apprentice. So you're setting the stage for how they're going to show up in the future. And I love this little feedback loop. Respect goes both ways. So you respect the apprentice, you're more likely to get the respect in return. Next slide, please.
And Julie, I think you made an excellent point, and it's really about helping them to understand at the beginning of their career how to navigate workforce culture. how to navigate what rules basically are kind of set in stone, which ones are more flexible, and then for you guys to serve as a liaison and helping them to make sure that they're getting their career off in the right direction.
Yes, yes, perfect, perfect. This slide, and I'm assuming that the slides are going to be made available to everyone so you can actually sort of look at it. But this goes back to a little bit to expectations, and we've been working with U Science. It's called YOU, and then the word science as an assessment tool in one of the Chicago charter schools. And I just point this out, and I encourage you to study it. What it shows, so in each topic, and on the left, I realize this might be a little bit hard for you to see, but the first block is licensed practical nurse. On the left-hand side shows interest, and on the right-hand side shows aptitude. So U Science is gonna weigh out the interest versus the aptitude. If you look at let's see, which one was all the way to the right, that's a registered nurse, and you can see the interest is high, the aptitude. So that's showing that a lot of interest, but people did not have the aptitude. So there can be a gap between what someone thinks they want to do or be and what they really are able to be successful at. And sometimes this does crop up in more so in a youth apprenticeship than with more experienced individuals. So just something to think about. It's a good good thing to think about in your selection phase as well, or when you're working on helping the youth apprentices or the youth know which direction that they want to go. And then lastly, these are two of my favorite videos. So anyone that is going to mentor the youth apprentices really needs to have some background, some understanding of how to do that. These are not, the Lori Hunt on the power of mentoring is specifically about mentoring. They're not how-to guides, but I think that they present some really important things to think about when you're coaching or mentoring young people.
Thank you so much, Julie, for joining us and leading an awesome discussion about onboarding and mentoring for youth apprentices. So I really want to leave a little space and time for anyone that had any questions or comments based upon today's discussion. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Andrea to close us out.
Thanks so much, Julie. Appreciate it. And if there are any resources that folks on the phone have or on the WebEx have, please just go ahead and share them. You can always reach out to Cassandra or myself or to Julie. Go ahead and share them. I'm going to try to put those all into our Youth Apprenticeship Works Community of Practice site. Mentorship is really personal. It's but there is some science behind it, and the more staff that's involved, the easier the mentorship becomes. And so I encourage you to kind of think about what Julie has talked about here, not as kind of an only one-to-one, but as kind of a change in the ethos of the organization. So the more that young people are brought into that organization and the more staff that are brought along with that, it can often just really change the culture of the organization for good. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And again, if you are not part of our virtual community of practice, please do reach out to Cassandra. She can help get you involved in that. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.